Welcome back to Recruiting Blitz. My name's Tim Verghese. We appreciate you guys tuning in. Before we get started, be sure to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and be sure to check out our work over at InsideNebraska.com as well. June is here. We kicked off camps on Sunday. Nebraska had headlined by four-star 2027 quarterback commit Trey Taylor, leading off the group competing in front of the coaching staff in hopes of earning an offer, earning some attention from the coaching staff. We'll have updates over at InsideNebraska.com with some of the top campers. Already got some intel flowing over there. And we've got camps, the next couple of weeks. We start official visits this weekend, and that's what this video is going to be about, is previewing this June 6th to June 8th visit weekend, what that's going to look like for Nebraska, and so much more. It's a busy time of year. You're going to see commitments. You're going to see new visitors. You're going to see visitors drop off the visitor list. There's a lot happening. So stay locked in to InsideNebraska.com for all the latest with Nebraska recruiting. We're going to get right into it with this June 6th official visit preview. Nebraska's kicking off official visits with right now scheduled to be 10 official visitors. That list could change a little bit as this week progresses, as we get closer to Friday when these guys are expected to arrive. This weekend features some top targets and a couple flip targets. One Nebraska's trying to keep in the class, one Nebraska's trying to flip away. So, like I said, we'll get right into it. Headlining this visitor weekend is none other than Nebraska four-star cornerback commit CJ Brona out of Windermere High School down in Winter Garden, Florida. Nebraska battling Florida State, and Penn State to hold on to his commitment. He's just coming off an official visit to Florida. The Gators appear to be the program that is the biggest threat to Nebraska. Here, they've made him feel like a priority. They're the program closest to home. They've had him on campus multiple times here in the spring, and they're working to get this flip done. And so we'll have our ears to the ground with intel coming out of his visit to Florida. But he's still expected in Lincoln this weekend. The hope is Nebraska can remind him why he made that commitment to Nebraska back in November. He's got a lot of trust in the coaching staff, has developed a strong relationship with Addison Williams since he took over defensive backs from John Butler, who of course got promoted to defensive coordinator. It's been those two primarily leading the way for Nebraska with Brona, but Matt Rule's been involved. A few other assistants have been involved. Nebraska ultimately hoping to get him to shut things down after this weekend. I think that's the ultimate goal. We'll see if that ends up happening. I think he still wants to make his visits to Florida State and Penn State, but Nebraska ideally would like to get him to just shut things down and cancel all visits after getting back into Lincoln. This will be his first time back in Lincoln since committing back in November. One of the more important visitors in the month of June, regardless of position, is four-star offensive tackle target Kelvin Obot out of Fruitland, Idaho. Nebraska's going to get him in town this weekend. Nebraska battling Oregon, Michigan, and Utah for the 6'5", 285 offensive tackle, one of the top offensive tackle prospects in the country. This is a wide open recruitment. Feels like all four programs have at least some reason to feel confident. Utah is a bit of a dark horse here, but they've done some really good work to make them feel like a priority, make them feel confident in their ability to develop offensive linemen. Oregon, has some confidence as a school closest to home. Technically, Utah and Oregon, relatively close to home, but Oregon's kind of been pitching the proximity, the development they've had along the offensive line over the last few years, and the opportunity to compete at the top of the Big Ten. Michigan offers the same thing. Has that track record of development at offensive line, but Nebraska's been in this recruitment for a while. They made him a priority way back in the fall when he was just starting to hop on schools' radars, and he's seen visits from Donovan Raiola, Keith Williams, Matt Rule, Marcus Satterfield. Like the whole staff has kind of worked here to make Obot feel like a priority, make it known to him that Nebraska really wants him, and he's a top of board target along the offensive line. While Nebraska's working to keep Brona in the class, they're working to flip four-star edge rusher Cameron Wilson away from Syracuse. We've talked about this group for a while, especially over the last few weeks as this one comes into focus. Feels like this is going to come down to Syracuse, Florida State, and Nebraska. And ultimately, I don't think he sticks with that Syracuse commitment. I think both Florida State and Nebraska have a little more to offer just all around as programs from an NIL standpoint, from a competitiveness standpoint. And so I think that's ultimately what's going to be the deciding factor here is what does he pick? Relatively schematically, both these programs, Florida State and Nebraska, are similar. Even Syracuse, all three relatively similar schematically. Of course, Nebraska, kind of sticking to some some core elements of what Tony White ran at Nebraska. Now, obviously, he's the defensive coordinator of Florida State, but sticking to some of those core elements while adding John Butler's own influence and his own multiplicity to the defense. But Wilson's seen as a jack in Nebraska scheme, in Florida State scheme, could eventually grow to a defensive end, but as of now, kind of seen as a jack, given that he's 6'5", 215 pounds. Not sure how much bigger he gets. Definitely has plenty of room to add to his frame and has a knack for getting after the quarterback at 17 and a half sacks as a junior, over 30 tackles for loss. Just a disruptive pass rusher. But ultimately, the question with him long term is how much weight can you add to his frame and where he ultimately sticks position wise. But Nebraska really wants him. They're also going to get his teammate, four-star center Ryan Marray, on campus this weekend. This is a Miami-Nebraska battle primarily, but Georgia Tech's also involved. Ole Miss is involved. Ultimately, do think this comes down to Nebraska and Miami. The in-state Hurricanes have some momentum, feel like they have the ability to keep them home. I think that's something for Marray and his family that they'd be intrigued by the opportunity to stay home, play for Alex Mirabel and Mario Cristobal, two offensive line guys. But Nebraska's done a really good job here. Nebraska has let him know that he's their top center target. He's the state champ in heavyweight wrestling. He's a mauler on the interior, has some light feet. Just fits what Nebraska, Donovan Raiola specifically wants at center, wants along the interior of the line. And Nebraska's done a good job of closing with those guys under Donovan Raiola, specifically along the interior. Of course, we've talked plenty about their offensive tackle recruiting woes, but they've done a really good job of finding and landing their top guys along the interior. And so Murray's a priority. Wilson's a priority. Nebraska hopes that getting them in town together and being able to kind of pitch them on teaming up again in Nebraska and reminding both of them that, hey, Nebraska is not close to home for sure, but there's plenty of South Florida influence on the roster from Philip Simpson down to, influential players on both sides of the ball, Ja'Cory Barney, Willis McGahee, Amari Sanders, Larry Tarver, so on and so forth. Just a lot of Miami influence on the roster right now, and Nebraska hopes that gets them over the top with these two. Nebraska is also scheduled to get four-star cornerback Cameron Hamill on campus. It's another Oregon battle. They're battling Oregon, Texas A&M, and Penn State. Penn State's already had him on campus for an official visit. There's sources in this recruitment that think this is going to ultimately come down to Oregon and A&M. Nebraska's hoping to change that, hoping to make up some ground on the Ducks and the Aggies this weekend. They had him on campus back in April. They really impressed them with both the facilities, with just the DB play, with how much emphasis the staff has on developing young defensive backs, with Phil Snow on the staff, John Butler on the staff, Addison Williams, Adam DiMichele. There's so many just secondary focused coaches on Nebraska's defensive staff. And so that's what Nebraska's hoping to sell is the development at Nebraska, is kind of the opportunity to come in and compete for playing time early on. Of the recruitments we've talked about so far, this is one Nebraska has a ton of ground to make up, but not necessarily an insurmountable recruitment by any means. This is one Nebraska is within striking distance, I guess is the best way to put it. Nebraska is scheduled to get four-star running back Brian Bonner out of Valencia, California. This is one, like Hamill, a lot of ground to make up here, in my opinion. UCLA has some momentum. Washington has some momentum. Notre Dame at one point had some momentum. They're not in this recruitment anymore as they've picked up two running back commits. And so this feels like, it's kind of West Coast or Nebraska. Penn State also involved as well. This is feels just like a Big Ten recruitment all the way. Yeah, I mean, proximity has really been the thing that, kind of sticks out with Bonner recently. He's made a ton of visits to UCLA and Washington this spring. Nebraska's going to have to remind him. He's not been on campus at all this calendar year. I don't believe he made it in for a game last fall. He was in town last spring. But Nebraska just hasn't had him in town in a while. And so the goal is just, showing him the facilities, showing him that, Nebraska can be a place that he can call home. Nebraska kind of has to hit on one of these running backs, one of these top running back targets, whether it's Bonner or Dfan Walker, who's scheduled to visit later this month. Nebraska has to land one of those guys. And Bonner has that world-class speed Nebraska wants, that home run hitting speed. 6 foot height, 190 pound weight, legit size to pair with that speed, can play every single down. And so he's a priority. He's a guy that Nebraska would love to have. But this isn't going to be a recruitment that gets decided this weekend, but Nebraska hopes that by getting him in town and impressing him on his official visit, they earn some staying power, earn like have a legit shot when it is time to commit. That's the ultimate goal for Nebraska in that recruitment. One four-star, we're a little hesitant to see what he ends up deciding is four-star tight end Luke Sorenson. Um, could ultimately he's technically scheduled to visit Nebraska June 5th through the 7th, but that visit could get replaced. We've heard a ton of momentum around Penn State and USC, and that one UCLA still hanging around a little bit too. Notre Dame recently offered their one to keep an eye on too, but I just don't think this is going to ultimately go Nebraska's way. But if they get him on campus, anything can happen. He did really enjoy his first time in town back in April. Liked the coaching staff, really liked kind of the strength and nutrition program. The biggest question with Nebraska here was always going to be, can they sell him on the roll? Sorensen knows what he wants. He's a priority target for programs like Penn State, Notre Dame, and USC that have had some success with the tight end position recently, producing top guys. Obviously, Penn State with Tyler Warren most recently. Notre Dame has had a run of guys that have gone on to the NFL, and so Sorensen is looking for a school that feature him in the offense. Nebraska's told him that, but can they show him that? I don't think that's going to happen this weekend. In terms of just being able to show that they're obviously not playing games, but Nebraska's going to do their best, and this is one that, if it doesn't go their way this spring, I think Nebraska's going to circle back in the fall after they have an opportunity to kind of showcase the tight end position, whether that's Heinrich Haarberg, Luke Lindenmeyer, or even someone like Carter Nelson in the fall. I think that's when they will try to push and show Luke or show Sorensen that, they have a vision in mind for what role he'd play in the offense. But yeah, role is the biggest thing there. Penn State's kind of sold him on the Tyler Warren role. Further down the visitor list, three-star linebacker Casey Thomas is expected in town out of Bishop Heelan in Sioux City, Iowa. Nebraska battling Iowa State there. Again, this one, little ground to make up. This one, I think, ultimately comes down to Iowa and Iowa State, but Nebraska can change that this weekend. Nebraska has had him on campus a few times, have let him know that, he's a priority target, especially with some recent misses at the linebacker position. Kind of, he's becoming a much more important target. So, wouldn't be surprised if Nebraska makes a really aggressive run at him this weekend, not just to kind of make up some of that ground on Iowa and Iowa State, but to potentially just get him to shut things down, prevent those other visits from being made, trying to go over the top and really capture some momentum. Next up on the list, three-star or four-star offensive lineman Hayden Ainsworth out of Biloxi, Mississippi. A kid that has not visited Nebraska, at least as a recruit, but reclassified from the 27 class up to the 26 class. In-state Ole Miss is the program to beat. Liberty's involved, NC State's involved as well. Nebraska's involved. And really, Nebraska's involvement comes from the fact that he grew up in Omaha, spent some time in Omaha growing up, really likes the area, still maintains some strong ties to the area. The opportunity to essentially come home is what Nebraska's pitched him on and what he's so intrigued to figure out. So this is really like a first opportunity to really see the campus in depth, meet with the coaching staff, and interact with them on a personal level, and see what happens. Again, I think in-state Ole Miss is the school to beat. I think they're far and away the favorites here coming into this month. But Nebraska has these hometown ties. He's got a really really fond of his time in Omaha, growing up in Nebraska. And so I think if Nebraska can tug on those heartstrings and press the right buttons, they can legitimately kind of contend here and compete with Ole Miss through the final stretch of this recruitment. Last but certainly not least on this visit list this weekend is Rex Waterman out of Chandler Hamilton, a priority interior target for Donovan Raiola. Nebraska loves Waterman. Nebraska thinks he's the type of mauling interior prospect they need. 6'4", 293 pounds. They also think he's a guy that the path to the field is not as long as some other guys at the position. He's going to come in physically able to compete at the Big Ten level, and ultimately the question here is. Can Nebraska outdo UCLA? Feel like this is going to come down to these two programs. The Bruins had him on campus a couple weekends ago, and Nebraska's getting him on campus this weekend. I would expect a decision shortly after. And so, yeah, this weekend is about can Nebraska overcome UCLA, who made a strong first impression, but Nebraska has, from Donovan Raiola to Matt Rule, this has been, kind of they made him known he's a priority, despite, he's a three-star prospect, not one of the top prospects in Arizona, but Nebraska's made it known to him that, they want him. Ultimately, I think, if you're picking between these schools because it's UCLA, Nebraska. Duke's also involved a little bit. Think it's, but they're a little further out. Ultimately, it's academically, can Nebraska compete? Can Nebraska show them enough football wise and academically to compete with the opportunities he'd have at UCLA or Duke. And so that's the weekend. That's what Nebraska's bracing for. We may not see any imminent decisions coming out of the weekend. We could see maybe one or two, but more likely than not, it's gonna just be a weekend that kind of comes and goes. We'll obviously have plenty of intel over at InsideNebraska.com. I think the visits of emphasis are Brona just working to kind of maintain their position as a top school, as a school he's committed to. Obot, obviously, offensive tackle, such a need this cycle. Cameron Wilson trying to adjust the edge rusher position. Bonner just to see, can they get back in that? Can they make up on some of the ground that make up some of the ground that they've lost to UCLA and Washington? And then you look further down the list. I think Waterman, like because that's a guy that if you could point to anyone and say, hey, Nebraska comes out of this weekend with this guy committed, I think it's Rex Waterman. So we'll see what happens. Nebraska's got a busy week ahead. June 6th, of course, we'll have the Battle at the Boneyard 7-on-7 tournament. We'll have a video later this week with some of the details on that, some top players expected in competition at that event. Right now, the roster is still getting finalized. A couple teams still getting finalized as well, and so no, the details aren't set just yet. But we'll be there with coverage June 6th. We'll be back for the camp of June 8th, and we'll have plenty of coverage coming out of this official visit over the next week. And yeah, like I said at the start of this video, stay tuned to InsideNebraska.com for daily recruiting coverage. Keep it locked over here at the Inside Nebraska YouTube channel as well. We'll be back next week with a recap from this official visit weekend and a preview of the June 13th official visit weekend. Thanks for tuning in. We'll be back next week.